Alright guys, so let's do an end of the world update. So it seems that the doomsday clock has gone back by a minute. A lot of things have happened over the last 24 hours, but the trade war isn't over. Now we have seen Mexico and China bend the knee. They have got down on their knees and they have kissed the ring. Now what happened? Well, Trump got what he wanted. Mexico is sending 10,000 troops to the border and Canada has pledged more or less the same to stop migrants and fentanyl from entering the US. So now we have a 30 days pause. Now this sounds like good news, but let's not forget that the tariffs are not 100% confirmed to be gone, right? We still have some stuff coming up for Europe, which is the topic of the video today. And we have to understand that China is still planning their retaliation. A lot of bad things are bubbling on the surface. Now, that's just a surface interpretation, right? 30-day pause. Now, Trump told reporters that Mexico and China, they still have to balance their trade to close the enormous trade deficit to buy more American goods. But what have we seen over the last 24 hours, right? I was quite surprised by the backlash Canada actually gave. Trudeau's speech sounded quite strong, right? Quite strong. But a lot of supermarkets in Canada, they actually blocked away a lot of goods coming from the US, right? I saw grocery aisles, pictures of grocery aisles saying that we don't sell any more American goods. So the backlash on the ground can be quite brutal. Now, Trump wants to force both the demand and supply side using tariffs. What does that mean? It means that he wants to reshore production and make allies buy more US. And at the end of the day, this is what the US economy wants to be. They want to be more or less self sufficient, but they still want the world to buy stuff from them because the cost of production in the United States is just so high. If they don't have foreign companies coming in to subsidize them, their economies, their industries are just going to collapse. Borrowing costs are so high, inflation is so high, and as strong as the US consumers are, their purchasing power is going down and down. Remember, they have a credit card crisis in the country. Borrowing costs are extremely high. A lot of people, they're struggling with their mortgages and they can't even live in their own homes. So the US needs foreign countries to come in and buy their stuff. And this is exactly what Trump is going to go to Europe with. His approach is all about this. Now, Trump has promised and he has vowed to punish the European Union, the EU. He wants Europe to be even more highly dependent on the US. Let's remember that this goes back all the way to his first term in 2016 to 2020, right? Now, at that point of time, Trump wanted to block Europe from actually getting cheap Russian gas. We all remember the conversations he had with NATO. He was scolding Germany, he was making fun of Germany, saying that, you shouldn't be too reliant on Russian gas. And it came to a point that he actually tried to stop the completion of Nord Stream 2 through financial sanctions. Now, that didn't work because at the end of the day, Russia pushed through with the construction, so Nord Stream 2 has been constructed, the pipeline is there. But Nord Stream 1 has been blown up, and yeah, right? Official reports it was done by a drunken person on a leisure boat. He James Bond his way all the way down, dived don't know how many hundreds or tens of meters down, and blew up the pipeline on his own. Fine, let's just believe the official story for that one. But just because of that, Trump has made it clear for his plans for Europe. He wants them to buy more US LNG and energy. And funny enough, von der Leyen herself, she has made a very bizarre statement saying that they're going to cut away Russian LNG, fair enough, but they're going to move to US LNG and it's cheaper. Now, I've been a chemical engineer, I studied as a chemical engineer, and I've been in the oil industry for a while. And I can say without reservation that pipeline gas coming from your neighbor is going to be much more cheaper and efficient than loading gas, liquefying it, putting it into a boat, sending it halfway through the world, burning fuel at the same time, and LNG leaking off into the ether is going to cost more. How is that even more? How is that cheaper than Russian LNG or Russian pipeline gas? I don't understand. And if Europe actually makes this compromise, if they sign the Faustian Pact, this is going to really cripple their industries in the long term. What Trump is trying to do is consolidate America's hold on their allies to remain the big brother forever. Now, Europe has vowed retaliation tariffs with Macron saying that the EU must stand up for themselves, right? I mean, Macron says a lot of things. And thanks to the energy crisis that they face, a 10% tariff is enough to devastate Europe. It's not like Europe is like China, right? They have a lot of manufacturing margin, a lot of profit margin to work with. A 10% tariff is enough to turn any product of theirs into unprofitable land. Now, Trump wants to end the deficit and he wants to get Europe to buy more. But the EU economies, they are simply too broke and broken at this point. How is Trump going to get a country, a continent that already has trouble to buy highly inflationary goods? The US exports inflation, China exports deflation. That's the big problem here. But as crazy as it sounds, it's likely that Europe will cave. They will probably trade a short term reprieve for long term stagnation. They want to secure the economies today and kick the can down the road, which, if I was a politician, yeah, conceivably, I would say I might choose the same thing as well. Now, the issue is the dangerous effects of Trump's tariffs. What that would mean, right? If Europe doesn't comply, it's going to crush the euro even further. It hammers currencies, and when the euro crashes, all imports coming to the union becomes more expensive. And unlike the US or China, the EU virtually has no supply chains around. So it's not like they have a big supply of rare earths sitting in various pockets of Europe they can just channel towards Germany. Everything else, most of it will have been imported in from the rest of the world. Maybe rare materials from China, and yes, US LNG from the United States. And with the euro dropping down, all your cost of production starts to shoot up. How are you even going to send competitive goods to the US even if the tariffs goes down? Which is could be the ultimate plan that the United States wants. Tariffs on Europe would most definitely shift the production to the United States. Now we've already seen Volkswagen, Mercedes, and various other industries moving all the way to the US, German industries moving there. And now we have reports of Volkswagen. They are trying to sell their factories and production lines to the Chinese. It's quite sad. All their excess production, they can't compete uh, and even sell to their own local people. So why not just sell it off to China, sell it off to BYD, sell it off to NIO? But even that plan can collapse with US tariffs. Would China want to come in now, especially if Trump slaps a 10% or even 25% tariff on Europe? Now, is this going to end well for the United States? I have to say no. Long term, this is not a good strategy. Now, we have seen that without a doubt, US tariffs can cause currencies to collapse. The moment Trump announced his plan on Canada and Mexico, the Canadian dollar and the Mexican peso, they fell by 3% within hours. Now, the euro is also back to parity with the United States, the US dollar, 1 euro for $1. This isn't a good outcome because it leads to a bond market crisis, a dollar crisis for the US. Now, we could see a point where airlines in Europe could be forced to emulate what China or even Japan is doing. They might need to dump US bonds to raise the cash, to raise dollars. Now, France, for example, has over $330 billion in US debt. It's crazy, just go look it up. Even Canada has around 370 billion in treasury bonds. So G7 allies could dump US bonds as part of their retaliation strategy. And if you add in Japan, the entire G7 most likely has more than 1.5 trillion or even $2 trillion worth of US bonds. That's double or even triple what China has. And it's quite predictable to see what Europe is going to do with the money. They'll sell their US bonds and they'll spend their USD reserves for infrastructure projects. Right? There's no point in popping up the US bond market anymore. There's virtually zero incentive left. You have followed the US all the way through hell and high water, but in the end, instead of getting rewarded, you are threatened and you might be punished as well, right? Just look at what happened to Canada. And if Europe wants to conceivably compete with China, they have to emulate what China is doing out there. They will have to use their money, their reserves, to either secure the supply chains or fire up the nuclear power plants and try their best to close the energy gap that they have. Right now, the cost of energy compared to the United States is around 3 to 4 times higher. And that's a reason why a lot of companies in Germany, a lot of companies in Europe, they are being forced to move all the way westwards, all the way to the US. We might come to a situation where Europe just had has enough. They'll sell their US bonds, they'll sell their treasuries, and they will start to bid up projects instead. They'll start to invest in Europe. And if that happens, it won't be good for the US national debt. And let's not forget that the US deficit is nearly at 6.7% of GDP. And if the world cuts trade with the United States, US GDP, well, they're going to fall, right? The US can export more to the world. Trump will have to pump the deficit even higher. We could reach 7 or even 8% deficit to GDP in 2025 and beyond. However, if we see allies plus China start to dump bonds in addition to that, it really creates the perfect storm. Now, rates will be forced to stay high. The US will have to offer a bigger incentive through higher yields. All that while the Federal Reserve, they can't cut because inflation from tariffs is just rebounding. It's going to cause CPI in the United States for goods all the way from energy to the groceries that you buy. Prices are going to go up. So how can the Federal Reserve, how can Powell cut interest rates? So we could end up with a stronger dollar and higher borrowing costs, and both of which are extremely bad for US manufacturing and exports. Remember, the US, they are going to be competing with China. And when push comes to shove, what is China going to do? They are going to devalue their currency to make their exports more competitive. And if the US dollar continues to stay strong for an extended period of time, well, their exports won't be able to compete with the Chinese. Now, the biggest loser in this tariff war, I have to emphasize once again, is the EU. They simply have no leverage left in this relationship, in the global trading market, in the global export market, as well as their own political leverage with the US. Now, the most obvious way for them to survive, for them to thrive one day, is to reconnect trade back with China and reconnect back to Russian gas. But as we all know, right, China's the big boogeyman, and trying to go back to Russian gas is going to be politically impossible. Doing that will be unthinkable. It could invite even more US retaliation and higher tariffs. And worst of all, if Europe goes back to Russian gas, Russian commodities, they will be admitting that they are wrong, that the last 2 to 3 years, all the sanctions regimes have backfired.